A year or two ago, I started running an out-of-school care program in an elementary school. This is a sort of program where we take kids whose parents work too early or too late for them to be safely dropped off or picked up from school. We would give them snacks, play games, crafts, that sort of thing. I begin my work very early in the morning and end very late, often being the only one opening and closing the school. The school I work at is in a residential area. However, it's still quite isolated due to the size of the field and trees surrounding the border between the road and the school field. I often walk to work as I live quite close. This particular event occurred in the early spring, March or April, so it is still very dark at 6 in the morning. So, like every other day, I begin my walk to work. Nothing out of the ordinary, the streetlights still glowing from the night before. I walk through the tree line, across the pitch black field and up to the school, barely lit from the subpar security lighting outside. I make my way around the school to the back door I'm supposed to use. Funny, the light in the main hallway is on. Guess the caretaker forgot that one. I unlock the door and step in, only to find the silent alarm has been set. Weird. I walk around the bottom floor, checking the classrooms, bathrooms, and offices. Nothing looks disturbed. I turn off the alarm and go about turning on lights and setting up for the morning. My program is located in a small classroom at the back end of the school. I go to unlock the door to see it's already unlocked. I slowly proceeded inside and flick the lights on. I look around the room. Nothing's really out of order, except some markers and coloring sheets that have been left out, along with some toys scattered about the play area. I figure my coworker Rita must have forgot to tidy up and lock it when she left. I had left early and she was still new. Perhaps she forgot to go through our closing checklist before leaving. I had a client who required her child to be dropped off around 6:30 a.m. rather than the regular 7 a.m. start. So for a fee, I would take her child a bit earlier as I was there by then anyway. She was a small girl, around 6 years old at the time, with big brown eyes and blonde hair. Let's call her Julie. I hear the familiar buzzer sound at 6:30 that signals Julie's arrival. I walk through the lonely halls to the front door. I look through the glass to see Julie and her father waiting patiently for me. With a smile on my face, I open the door wide and greet the child warmly. She takes my hand and we walk down the hall to the staff kitchen to prepare a morning snack for the children. We begin getting ready when Julie asks to use the bathroom. Usually, the children have to go in pairs, but I said go ahead anyway. Julie makes her way out of the kitchen into the bathroom a few feet away. I can hear her, so I continue with my preparations. I hear her humming, I hear her talking to herself. And then I hear someone answer. I hear a man answer. I ran to the bathroom, only to see Julie in the presence of a very skinny, disheveled man, covered in blood. His hair matted and slicked onto his oily forehead, glaring at us from his hiding place. I grabbed the child and made a mad dash down the hallway. We run into our room. I slam the door, locking it behind me. I scan the room for anywhere to hide. The storage closet. I grab Julie's hand and we run inside, slamming the door behind us. As we sit huddled and shaking, I search my purse and for my phone to call someone. Anyone. Damn it, I left it in the kitchen. But I must stay calm. Julie is shaking and crying at this point, and I have to stay calm for her. The police will come and get him, I whisper to her, trying everything I can think of to calm this terrified child. We just have to stay very quiet. Julie covers her mouth with her hands and nods. We can hear, through the door, the man muttering and cursing to himself, his voice growing louder and more audible as he came closer to our sanctuary. Poor Julie, she just couldn't contain herself any longer and began letting out great loud sobs. At this point, I believe he heard us, and we began to hear someone jiggling the door handle. I put my hand over her mouth in an attempt to stifle her cries, but to no avail. After a few moments, the jiggling stopped. Silence now, except Julie's stifled cries. A few minutes pass. Maybe he's gone. Maybe this whole ordeal is over. Then, out of nowhere, he begins throwing himself against the door, screaming nonsense and curses. I decide it's just a matter of time before the crappy lock on the door breaks and we are all his. I hold Julie close and shut my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. We're trapped. We can't get out. Just then, a loud ringing fills the air. The fire alarm. My cooking must have set it off. Soon, the sounds of sirens start outside. Julie and I creep from our hiding spot. No more noise from the man. We slowly open the door to see the hallway full of smoke. We scuttle to the nearest exit and make our way to the firefighters outside. I tell them about the man and the whole ordeal. The police end up capturing him in the corner of a classroom, crying and rocking back and forth. Apparently, he is the father of a child who attends the school, who had been restrained from seeing her due to mental illness and drug problems. I still work at the school, but Julie left after the incident and I haven't seen her since. Nothing like this has happened again, and hopefully never will. My sophomore year of high school, my friend was murdered. Going back to freshman year, when I was in homeroom, I became friends with a girl who sat in front of me. Her name was Deanna Wright. We came from the same neighborhood and both worked at pizza shops a few blocks away. One night, I remember she had texted me asking me if I wanted to go do something. This was before everyone had unlimited cell phone plans. I had the Nokia that was basically a brick, and since I had to pay per text, if the text was short, we could get away with not having to open it, and therefore not being charged for the text. She told me she had a fight with her mom, and felt like going out and smoking some weed. I had work, and wouldn't be done till we closed up at 1 a.m. Since I needed gas money, I told her I couldn't blow off work, but I might come out afterwards. She sighed and said okay, and I texted her when I was done with work to see where she was at, because she couldn't decide what she was going to do yet. At 1:15 I texted her, but I didn't get a reply. No big deal, I thought. She probably was asleep. So Saturday I texted her. Nothing. Sunday. Nothing. Again, I thought she was probably grounded. That's why she was mad to begin with. She was grounded and went out, got grounded again, left and went out again. Monday, I came into school and I hear the teacher make an announcement. Sorry to inform you guys, but Deanna is missing. Her family has reported her missing after she left and went out and never came home. The teacher informed us. My stomach dropped. My fingers tingled. I couldn't believe it. Apparently, that night she ended up hanging out with a guy she met working at the pizza shop. Everything was going alright. She was a beautiful girl. She was a model, so we know what he was thinking. We aren't sure in what order things went down. She was drugged, raped, and strangled. Then her vile murderer decided to cut her body into pieces, put her in a steel drum, and light her on fire. I think about that night over and over again. Should I have gone? Would that have really made any difference? Or would he have just killed us both? Her father was an FBI agent, so it truly goes to show that if someone is evil and wants to kill you, then nothing, and I mean not a thing, will get in their way. So, Lamar Haynes, please, let's not meet. I went into class the first day of school, and there was this new guy that I'd never seen before. He looked like any normal guy, just seemed a little shy. I was just a regular student, not super smart, super athletic, or super popular. Just a regular student, trying to finish school and go on with my life. My teacher did a seating chart on the first day of class, and I ended up sitting right next to this new kid. We didn't talk much other than, "Hey, what's up?" And I learned his name was John, and after a few weeks, we got to talking a little more. I never saw him outside of class, and we never got very chummy, but it was always civil. After a few months, I got some pretty bad senioritis and just stopped caring. My teacher was easily the worst teacher I'd ever had in all my schooling. She would start belittling me in class and saying terrible things. John always stood up for me every time our teacher went on one of her tangents. I started skipping class and whatnot, like normal high school kids do. Until one day, I had a death in my family, and I was out of school for about a week and a half. My mother had told our school administrator about the situation, but I'm guessing the memo wasn't passed on to my English teacher. When I got back to school, it was my first class of the day. My teacher tore me a new one. She was screaming at me and calling me lazy, and saying how I would never amount to anything. I ran out of the room crying and called her a bitch. While I was gone, John tore into her, standing up for me again, and he told her why I was gone. I don't know exactly what was said or done while I was gone, because I refused to go back into class that day. The next day, after everything cooled down, I thanked John, and I had a lot of respect for him. It meant a lot to me that someone would stand up for me like that. The rest of the year goes on like normal. We all graduate, and I never see John again, but I'd always remembered what he did for me in class that day. I go on with my life and start college. Then, one day, I turn on the news and hear about this guy was murdered in my area of town. A few days later, the news is talking about another murder. They found the guy, and when they showed his picture, I was in total disbelief. It was John. He went on a murderous rampage and killed 2 guys, and shot and wounded another. It is still crazy for me to think that the kid who stood up for me in English class is now facing 2 life sentences in prison. When I was in middle school, I went to an alternative school in Virginia. What this actually means was, me and the other kids at this school are or can be somewhat problematic. There were frequent fights, mental breakdowns, and somewhat unnerving art displayed, all student-made. There was 2 cliques, kids who landed there from fighting, and kids who suffered from mental illnesses or were generally outcasts. I was part of the fighting crew. I unlearned most of those behaviors at that school, but that's definitely what landed me there. One day, I opened my locker, finding a note that read, "Hey, I really enjoyed your presence and want to get to know you. I am very unhappy, we all are, but you are just a smiley sunshine, and it makes me feel a little bit better. From your special admirer." Needless to say, my first thought was, wow, I hope it's from a hot girl. One day, at lunch on the basketball court, my special admirer showed herself. This was when I met Katie, a day that would stick with me. She was in my grade, a bizarre-looking individual with long hair that covered most of her face. She seldom spoke and played a lot of Pokemon, but she talked to me like no one else. I didn't know what it was about me that she was fixated on, but she would find me and consoling me about the weirdest things. Her dog dying, her legs being itchy. Anything she could think, she would nervously walk up to my lunch table and tell me. I felt bad for her because they were usually negative things, and I tried my best to be friendly and polite. Then I started getting phone calls from Katie on my home phone at night. She would call and tell me about whatever the most horrific thing she had seen on the news that night was. And when I stopped answering calls, she would leave messages up to 5 minutes long of rambling and in a nervous, quiet voice. "Why don't you answer my calls? You're my best friend, I love you. I don't want to die anymore, you're killing me. Like those kids on the news who died, but you're killing me, I love you, please." At school the next day, I was chatting it up with a cute girl at lunch and enjoying myself, just being a boy in my early teens. Out of nowhere, Katie attacked the girl, spitting on her and pulling her hair. She started eating lunch outside near the tree line, looking at me from across the courtyard. I told the school counselor I thought Katie might be having a mental episode, and they said they would look into it. This really seemed to set her off. She left more messages on my home phone. "If you tell people about us, they will take me away from my parents, and then I'll take you away from yours." I told the school again, and I noticed she wasn't in school for a couple of days. I got my first cell phone, and Katie somehow got my number within days. One night, while browsing my phone before bed, an image was sent to me on an unknown number. I opened it, only to find a photo of a woman's forearm. AH was crudely carved into the skin. Those were my initials. I also quickly recognized the bracket with my name written on it, and I knew it was Katie. I called the police and gave them the information. I never saw her back at school. A couple of times, a fake Instagram or Facebook account would get in touch with me, and I would quickly find out it was her. But for the most part, things with her stopped altogether. However, there were 2 more incidents in the summer between 8th grade and high school that I know were linked to her. One of them involved me getting another image sent to me from the same number, but this wasn't of her. It was of me eating lunch with my sister downtown. Next was in my freshman year of high school. I was at an average high school, having left my fighting days behind. My girlfriend at the time, who is still my girlfriend of 5 years, went to a different school. She told me while she was in the locker room after gym, a girl with dark hair covering her face began creepily groping her and telling her to stay away from Andy because he's my special guy. I've never seen her since then, but every time I walk past my old middle school on my route to work, I am incredibly chilled. What is most scary to me about the whole thing was her thought process. What could have been going on in her head? In general though, I think I can do without any more special admirers. This happened in 1999, when I was a sophomore in high school and 14 years old. I had just moved back to America from the Middle East, where I'd spent about 5 or 6 years. Because of the standard of dress there, and the fact that my old school had uniforms, and I had no social life, I didn't own a t-shirt, let alone a pair of jeans. Every day, I went to school wearing a long dress or a long skirt, with my mousy blonde hair tied back with a scarf used like a headband, as opposed to a headscarf. I never did that, except out of respect for my host country on religious holidays. I was awkward, mousy, and had a hard time making friends. This was a few years before 9/11, but in my little town, there was still animosity towards anyone different. And with my British English accent and the fact of where I grew up, I was pretty different. I only really had 3 friends, Joe, Nathan, and Kenny. Joe lived on my bus route, though he was way out in the middle of the country, so he and his 2 younger brothers were always the first on the bus in the morning and the last off the bus in the evening. Our day always followed the same schedule. I'd get on the bus, go sit next to Joe. We'd talk a little bit until we got to school. Then we'd hang out with Nathan and Kenny for a bit and go to our separate classes. I was in advanced placement classes, and they were in regular ones, so I didn't share any with them. But every other day our lunches coincided, so the 4 of us would get to eat together. Then, in the evenings, Kenny and Nathan would get picked up, and Joe and I would take the bus home. I don't really remember how we started dating. I think Joe told me that he liked me, and I said I liked him back. We would hold hands on the bus and at lunch, while Kenny and Nathan teased us relentlessly. It was so innocent, even for 14. Joe was sweet and thoughtful and completely non-threatening. He was the type to always make sure you had the better half of something, always the first to offer his coat when you were cold, and was always pulling out chairs and holding doors open. A real gentleman, which of course, Kenny and Nathan teased relentlessly. This went on for a few weeks, though it stayed strictly at school. We weren't able to see each other outside of school, because he always had to go straight home or his mother would be furious. Sometimes he would come to school with bruises, but he always said it was from roughhousing with his brothers. I didn't really have a reason to doubt him. Then one day, there was an upcoming half day from school. Joe suggested he come over to my place and we could have our first afternoon together. We were both so excited. He would take the bus to my stop and then either walk or my parents would drive him home later. It was going to be great, and I was beside myself with excitement. Everything went smoothly until the actual day. One of his brothers had found out about his plan and told his mother. She, in turn, called up to the school, apparently shrieking like a banshee and demanding that he come home not a minute late or he'd be in for a world of hurt. He told me at my stop that he would go home, talk to her, and then get back as soon as he could, even if he had to walk. I was worried, but he kissed my cheek and said everything would be fine, and he'd be there in an hour or so. So I went inside and waited, and when I got tired of waiting inside, I went out with my dog and waited. I thought about calling him, but the one time I had tried before, his mother had spewed so much venom at me for daring to call their house that the idea made me cringe internally. So I just waited. Eventually, the sun went down and he never showed up and never called. I was disappointed, but I decided it was probably for the best and went about my evening as usual. The next morning, when I got on the bus for school, the bus driver, a middle-aged woman with really pretty graying hair, looked at me and suddenly started sobbing. I thought that was odd, but it was kind of a dreary day in general, so maybe I was reading too much into it. I started heading for the back of the school bus and noticed that Joe wasn't there. Neither were his two brothers. That was odd. I started to get a little worried, but I thought that their mother had taken them to school herself that day. The bus route went along as normal for a while until we came to a section of heavily forested area where the driver pulled over. She was shaking and crying and just not acting like herself. Almost immediately, I looked out the window and saw 3 policemen walking up to the bus. Apparently, they had pulled up behind her. She talks to them for a moment, and then one leads her off. Another takes the wheel, and the third one comes and sits by me. Neat, I get to sit next to an officer, I thought. And then I thought I was in trouble, especially since there were so many other open seats. But he was very friendly, and we chatted about school and life until we got to campus. Then, both remaining officers followed us inside. I went to meet up with the boys where I usually did, but Joe wasn't there either. Neither of them had seen him, but we just hoped he was okay and went about our morning. In first period, I received a page to come to the office immediately. I thought this was about some scholarships I had been working on, but I thought it was weird that they'd pull me out of class. When I got there, the principal, the counselor, and the police were all there. I suddenly felt like a caged rabbit. And then they told me what happened. The night before, when Joe had gotten home, he had told his mother that he was going to come see me, and that was final. Obviously, it was very much not final. They argued about it. She grounded him, and it came to blows. I found out later that his mother had been very abusive to Joe, which doesn't excuse what happened, but it does add some understanding, at least to me. After the confrontation was over, he laid in bed all night, planning what he would do. He decided he was going to wait for his brothers to go to the school bus and hang back, telling them he would drive himself to school, which wasn't too far out of the ordinary. Once they were all gone, he would take the butcher knife from the kitchen and finish his argument with his mother once and for all. The next morning, everything went as planned for the most part. He got his brothers up and dressed and out for school, and watched until they were at the end of the long driveway to wait for the bus. Then, while his mother was sleeping, he went into her room and stabbed her multiple times. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the gloomy weather was causing troubles with the bus. I don't know the details, but I know it was a few minutes late starting its route. One thing I realized while writing this, and that Hollywood seems to miss half the time, is that when you stab someone while they're sleeping, they tend to wake up. And she did. She screamed and tried to fight back, but he was too determined and too strong. Since the bus was running late, the brothers were still standing on the side of the road when they heard the screaming. They both turned and ran back to try and help. They tried to defend their mother, but Joe turned on them, slicing one of them across the palms and the other in the gut. Then he ran. When the bus arrived, she saw one of the brothers staggering up the driveway covered in blood. In her panic, she kept going and called the police. Eventually, he made it to a corner store a little ways away. Some stories say it was the stabbed brother and that he crawled there, but I can't confirm that, nor do I really want to. After the police finished questioning me, I was sent home. I remember laying on my parents' bed, staring at the TV while the live coverage of his capture played. Or maybe it was a repeat. I don't know. But I remember seeing the news chopper filming as the police helicopter followed after Joe as he ran across the field. There was a cop perched out the door and braced on one of the landing struts, and as the chopper got lower, he jumped out and tackled him. That was the last time I ever saw Joe. The part that creeps me out though is what happened afterwards. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 40 years for murder and 20 for the assault on his brother. Not long after, the letters started. I never kept any, but they were long, crazy ramblings about how we would be together forever, how he did it for me, how he truly loved me and would do anything to be with me. No regret, no remorse. He was happy about what he did, if it meant I was his. We moved a little while later, and the letter stopped. I'm happily married now, getting on with my own life. But every time I think about him, I remember that he's up for parole in 2020. And what happens when he gets out? What happens if he comes looking for me? Best case scenario, he realizes I've moved on and we part amicably. But worst case, keeps me up at night.